Morning, everyone. Good morning. Welcome back to CoMotion Global. We're so excited to have you all back here. We have had an amazing couple of days of discussions, from advanced air mobility to gigaprojects to the future of autonomous vehicles. We hope you've made some great connections, had some amazing conversations, and hope you look forward to the rest of the day because we've got some great programming still to come. To help open today's programming, we've going to see a familiar face if you've been around the last couple of days here in the main stage. We've got someone who is an expert in studying how cities evolve and how transportation and technology advance our initiatives in urban life. Please welcome Mr. Greg Lindsay, Senior Fellow at MIT Future Urban Collectives Lab. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. It's a pleasure to be up here on stage as a presenter. Thank you, John, for having me back. I'm going to give a bit of a quick palate cleanser here. Let's see, pull it up on stage here. This builds off work that we did at CoMotion going back to 2017. So when we launched CoMotion LA, we were at the moment where we saw a lot of cities grappling with the legacies here of the smartphone and the disruption that came out of it, and dealing with the fact that, like, yes, there were suddenly now devices, robots, autonomous vehicles, Ubers that were both collecting and generating data in the public right-of-way and struggling with how to regulate that. And at the time, I was thinking about what would come next. How could we help city officials preemptively think and anticipate about what technologies would disrupt the built environment then? And so in 2022, about this time I was thinking about this, we had Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta, was investing tens of billions of dollars into the metaverse. And we also had Apple working on this very anticipated headset, which became, in February 2024, the Apple Vision Pro. Now, of course, the Vision Pro is not the future, but it's very interesting to start to look at the kind of form factor it entailed. This was a device that was very much designed to be indoors. We saw in the form of the metaverse and the Apple Vision Pro, American big technology aiming to keep you indoors forever. This, of course, was very much a legacy of the pandemic, but also the antithesis of mobility. What would it mean if these things came to scale? And this, of course, is very troubling in the United States, where I'm American, I reside in Canada now. I don't have international data on this, but in the States, for example, we've seen that Americans have become an extremely immobile indoor society. The average American now spends 99 minutes per day more at home than they did in 2003. We have American census data on this. And this is very much a legacy of both, the pandemic and, of course, American remote work culture. But so much of that time is actually spent at home alone across every major American demographic group. So everything we've talked about here about cities existing to bring people together, to create integrated mobility systems so that we would enable that, instead what we saw is that Americans in particular were choosing to opt out of that. And what were they doing instead? Well, they were spending that time at home alone on their screens, video gaming, television, TikTok, et cetera there. So, here we have this incredibly troubling trend of American big tech aspiring to keep people into their homes forever. But of course, that's not how it works out. This technology escapes out into the wild. 2 hours after the Vision Pro was released in February 2024, this was posted to TikTok. Please do not use your Apple Vision Pros in the crosswalk, people. Don't ever do that. But this is what I was thinking of here, is that we could see how these devices would start to escape into the world. And of course, this is purely for clout. The Apple Vision Pro is a gyroscope. You're not allowed to actually use it while walking. But 2 hours after that, posted on TikTok, we saw this video as well. Yes, this is ostensibly someone driving a Tesla Cybertruck on full self-driving while using their Apple Vision Pro. Also a faked video. This doesn't work either. But I bring this up because the Secretary of Transportation at the time in the United States, Pete Buttigieg, felt compelled to post to Twitter at the time, please keep both hands on the wheel while driving in the metaverse. So here we can see this goes back again to the public policy outcomes. Now, instead of worrying about having physical devices in the built environment generating data, now we start to worry about what happens when people are using devices that overlay information on the world itself and start to cause people to behave in unpredictable ways that could lead to danger, potentially even death. Remember Pokemon Go? Could I see a show of hands of people who have played Pokemon Go or played it when it came out in 2016? It's great to see. So of course, Pokemon Go was, an incredible breakthrough. Really, still a decade later, the only breakthrough of the kind of augmented reality we've seen. It generates $1 billion a year in revenue to this day. Public Investment Fund recently, one of its entities recently purchased it. But Pokemon Go also generated a lot of behavior that was unforeseen. It turned out in the United States that distracted drivers playing the game while driving were speeding up into Pokestops to capture Pikachu before it disappeared. Researchers at Purdue University, speaking to the police, calculated what was happening. There was a 40% rise in traffic collisions around Pokestops, and when they extrapolated the numbers they came up with across the entire United States, as many as 250 people may have died in the first 6 months of the game alone. So here was a challenge for city regulators to think about is what happens when we have invisible worlds that were altering human behavior. And this happens for pedestrians as well. This is New York Central Park in the weekend after the game, where huge crowds surged through the park searching for rare Pokemon. I spoke to Jacqueline Liu, who today runs a consultancy thinking about kind of wayfinding for these kinds of digital encounters. At the time, she was at New York City Parks running their digital programs, and she had to teach actual parks officials how to play Pokemon Go to understand what was happening when crowds would suddenly emerge and pour through the park. And so this to me was very striking here because now you suddenly had to understand the game dynamics of Pokemon Go and play someone else's privately owned game to understand how people were using public space. So how can we start to anticipate this better? Because Pokemon Go had other effects as well. There was a massive class action lawsuit for trespassing. There was an attempt to basically ban the game from being played in public space in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin, that was overturned on free speech amendments. And suddenly we had this whole new set of issues that were opening up here as because of these invisible worlds that were being overlaid. And this problem will return. Mark Zuckerberg is still spending tens of billions of dollars, no longer on the metaverse per se, but on augmented reality glasses. Here he is demoing Project Orion, which he hopes to release in 2027, a mixed reality environment that will overlay information on top of viewers. And already we have the Meta Ray-Bans, which the CEO of EssilorLuxottica, which makes the glasses, estimates they'll sell tens of millions of units. Here you can see, this is real data here, Meta overlaying map information onto your glasses. For cities, this is particularly important and powerful because Meta doesn't aim to stop there with this. This is from their research video, Project Aria. Here, I won't play the overlay here, but you can see that their goal is to map the entire world, to basically use the cameras on board the Meta Ray-Bans to capture and build physical 3D models of every interior and exterior space. And as the researchers talk about in this video, they plan to combine that with the mountains of likes and other preference data that we have to basically build an environment where Meta can guide you to whatever it is they choose to. How do we deal with this as cities and as the public to think about how these companies, and it don't just be Meta, Google is doing the same with Android XR, Apple is building these glasses as well, where they are now deliberately steering people as well as vehicles through cities on paths that is difficult for us to determine. What does this look like at scale? My friend Keiichi Matsuda is a filmmaker and AR developer who imagined this in his famous film Hyperreality from 2016, released 2 months before Pokemon Go. Executives at Meta and Snap still talk about this as the dystopian film, the Blade Runner of augmented reality that they hope not to build. But to me, it's very interesting to think about. This envisions to this day. From a mobility standpoint, we can see the advantages of having wayfinding literally on the street itself, where you can clear out areas. But it's also an environment that's very gamified, filled with advertising, filled with also giant cats that might talk to us. We'll come back to that in a moment. This is another film that Keiichi made more recently called Agents, where he starts to think about how will AI be added to this environment? Because it won't just be a question of augmented reality images on the street. What happens when the AI chatbots that we now encounter on an almost daily basis suddenly take, maybe not physical form, but visual form, are able to talk to us? Will we have a single AI? Will there just be ChatGPT and Claude and a handful of others? Or as Keiichi proposes, we might have a panoply of agents. We might have different ones, silly ones for every task. Perhaps there will be ones for every transportation agency that we'll call up when we need to actually get from A to B, perhaps. And as an example of this, a demo they built, this is one he worked on with Niantic, makers of Pokemon Go. Here they imagined a spirit of the San Francisco ferry building. So if you were in San Francisco and you're about to take one of the ferries across the bay, you could, with augmented reality glasses from Snap or others, summon him and ask him for directions or ask him to tell you about the ferry building. I think they asked him to tell me 1,000 things about the ferry building. I guess he'll be there forever telling you all about them. But more recently, Keiichi developed this. This is called Peridot, again, created with Niantic and with Snap. And in this case, using their own programming language for AI and AR, this is a guide who can literally, if you ask where to go inside of this convention center, for example, to get to the innovation stage, Peridot will appear in your field of view and will walk you literally through and guide you that way. So we're on the cusp of actually creating ghosts or spirits that will guide us through the physical world. And the question is, who controls these spirits? Are they do we control them? Does Meta control them? Will cities control them? Will we have a city spirit that can take us from A to B? These are all the questions we're only beginning to answer. And this will only become more powerful as we start to see the rise of these digital twins, which we've talked about in the Sentient Cities track. This is called Virtual in Real Life. It's an experiment by New York University and Hong Kong University researchers. What they did was they took AI agents and they gave them machine vision models so they can recognize objects. They then took them and they let them loose inside of a digital twin of New York's Manhattan. In this case, just simply using Google Street View augmented with some other data. And what they could do is not only could they guide you to a coffee by dropping into this Street View map of Manhattan and looking around through basically snapshots of the built environment, but they could also go into Central Park, for example, and count every trash bin and count every park bench. We're also on the cusp of creating literal eyes on the street, agents that are able to go into the real world and tell you what is happening anywhere that's happening inside of these digital twins, which, of course, is what Meta aspires to do, right? This is exactly what it aims to do with its various glasses. So this is my challenge for cities in many ways, and this was the goal of my report, which I'll walk through in a moment here, is to start thinking about, we have incredible tools that cities are about to have here to basically show people how to navigate cities, what's coming, what's unbuilt yet in city environments, but also the potential dangers of guiding people through it. I skipped past it, so if I can go back one. This is the report I ultimately wrote for Cornell Tech as part of my fellowship there in 2022, 2023, The Augmented City. I gathered several people who were actually here at this conference, Karina Ricks, Selena Reynolds, who was the general manager of LADOT, one of our early champions at CoMotion, and several others who had grappled with this earlier wave of technology and asked them, along with expert practitioners and others, how would you address these kinds of challenges? And I won't walk you through the whole report, but I will give you the very high level. We used a novel foresight methodology called threat casting, where we basically sat down and created stories about what was the worst that could happen, and then basically generated what we thought might be the outcomes. So one outcome is that basically everything that's bad with the internet today, abuse and all sorts of horrible things happen, well, what happens when they get projected onto physical space? That's one thing that will become incumbent upon cities to start to think about how to regulate. Another thing is it'll become a vector for scams, all the sort of digital scams that happen today. I was just reading a whole piece about how in India, because of its digital payments layer, it's led to a sad, a massive blossoming of various scams there. Well, what happens when that becomes on physical space? And then also, the most marginal neighborhoods of cities, informal settlements and marginalized communities will also potentially become the most foremost victims of this. Then on the plus side, we might see this might become the interface for cities to think about creating new tools for civic engagement and to connect with people. One example is my friend's startup called In Situ, where they allow people to see the actual outlines of new buildings, of new projects through their own phones. So you can win over skeptical publics by showing them this is exactly what it will look like. This building will not be too huge. It will not be too scary. Let's build housing in this neighborhood. And so they work with cities around the world to connect them on this. We'll also have to see new roles, just as we had to basically reinvent how to regulate mobility inside of cities because of this data layer. We're now going to have to think about not just managing the physical public realm, but the digital public realm as well. And then finally, thinking about that we'll see these tools fall into others' hands. It won't just be up to the private sector or the public one, but to citizens themselves are going to find new ways of using this. And we need to find ways to both empower them and also to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand. So with that, I won't delve too much into it, but you can find me here. I'm here the rest of the day, and if you scan this QR code, it'll send you to a link to download my report. We have science fiction short stories by Canada's foremost author, Madeline Ashby, to help imagine some of the potential ramifications of this, and also audiobook version as well, in which Madeline and I read the stories. So I hope this kicks us off here to think about the future of this. Perhaps for CoMotion Global 26 or 27 or 28, we'll have panels thinking about how do we begin to regulate the digital public realm as well as the physical one. Thank you so much, and on with the show.